We are back again with On the Moneyline, a podcast by MMAPlay365. I'm your host Newsome, and we're here to talk about UFC Vegas 8 at the Apex in Vegas. With John Jones vacating the light heavyweight belt, we could be looking at a main event here that will have light heavyweight championship implications, as number 5 ranked Anthony Smith fights number 8 ranked Aleksandar Rakic. But just before we get into the breakdowns, we're coming off a very strange event last weekend. We only ended up with 9 fights due to fight cancellations. The dog of the week at MMAPlay365 was Takashi Sato, and he pulled out of his fight. We had an official bet in the OSP Menefield fight, and OSP pulled out a couple of hours before the fight started. And some of the other fight cancellations affected the Fun Gamblers section too. We broke even with winning 2 units on Joe Selecki, dropping 2 units on Mizuki Inoue, but we did create a winning parlay in the Fun Gamblers section, which is always nice. Remember, we have multiple packages on the MMAPlay365 website with UFC betting advice and daily fantasy sports content for DraftKings and FanDuel too. We also have various subscription lengths and options, so to see our full service list, please go and visit MMAPlay365.com for more information or to sign up today. And let's break down some fights. And in the main event, we've already touched upon it in the light heavyweight division. We've got Anthony Smith versus Aleksandar Rakic. Aleksandar Rakic currently the -275 favourite. The comeback on Smith at +235 as the underdog. As for where the value is in this betting line, I do think that there's still value on Aleksandar Rakic. I did expect to see him up at -350 if I'm being honest, for reasons that I'll touch upon shortly. No disrespect to Smith, but I just feel like he's coming back very, very soon after that beating he took from Glover Teixeira. But as for where the value is, I do think there's value in Aleksandar Rakic at -275. As for where the line moves, it's actually been moving a little closer, coming in a little shorter over the last couple of days. So I do expect that trend to continue and the line to still be getting shorter the closer we get into fight night. The reason being is I just think that some people, some bettors will feel like that's a big number for somebody like Anthony Smith. Even though he is coming off that beating against Glover Teixeira, it's still a really big number. And obviously Aleksandar Rakic is coming off a loss as well. So I think it gets a little bit shorter. How much shorter, I'm not too sure. Maybe we see Rakic at -250, maybe -225 at the absolute best. But I think at that point, we would see more money coming back in on Rakic. But as for how this fight plays out, it's a really interesting fight. We'll start with Smith. I've already touched upon it already. I think he's coming back a little too soon. The beating that he took from Glover Teixeira is the type of loss where I think fighters should take more time off. He's taken a few months off, come back. I think it should be much longer. I think maybe 6 months, 9 months. We've even seen some fighters take up to a year when they've suffered that type of defeat. So for Smith to come back into the cage this soon after that type of fight, I think it's very dangerous. I'm also surprised that he took the fight with Rakic as well, because I don't think it's the type of fight to take when you're coming back a little too soon. Sure, Rakic is coming off, that split decision loss to Volkan Ozdemir, but he's explosive, he's dangerous, he's well-rounded, and I'm just not sure it's the right fight for Smith at this point. And I'm not saying Anthony Smith can't win this fight. He's a good fighter. He's a top 5 fighter for a reason. He's got good striking. He's got power in his hands. He mixes in kicks as well. He's got very underrated Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So when he's on top, he can really go to work. He can look for those submission opportunities. We've seen him sweep fighters before, specifically the Andrew Sanchez fight. Sanchez had him in a bad position. He swept him. So he's good on the ground. He's got a good all-round game. But so is Rakic, and I find it quite surprising that Anthony Smith's gone on an interview to call him a one-trick pony, because when fighters say that about another fighter, one-trick pony or one-dimensional, and I find myself being a bit confused about what one dimension that is or what one trick that is, that to me proves that that fighter isn't one-dimensional or a one-trick pony. So when Smith said that about Rakic, I'm sat thinking, well, is he talking about his striking or is he talking about his wrestling? Because he's got both. Rakic is very well-rounded as well as being very explosive on the feet. I think if he can mix everything up in this fight, I think it could be quite straightforward for him. It all depends on what game plan that Rakic brings into this fight. The one real hole that I see in Smith's game is when he's on his back though. His jiu-jitsu is good, as I've already mentioned, top side, but when he's on his back, I think he struggles a little bit. I think he can get taken down a little easy as well. So I think that's a good path to victory for Rakic to come into this fight, look for a takedown, get on top of Smith, lay heavy on him, almost a replica of the Justin Ledet fight. Now, it's not going to be as easy as the Justin Ledet fight. There's levels in this game. There's a big difference between Anthony Smith and Justin Ledet, but that type of game plan will win Rakic rounds in this fight, and it will also make it a very difficult fight for Smith as well. I personally think for Anthony Smith to win this fight, he's got to come out there, he's got to use technical striking, a nice jab, nice 1-2, stay on the outside, make sure he's not getting himself in too much danger, definitely not get taken down, don't push forward and be aggressive. Now, listening to Smith in interviews, he feels like he's going to be the one to push Rakic back, and I'm not sure that's the right game plan. I think if he meets Rakic in the middle and they start exchanging strikes, I'm not sure that Smith comes out on top in that position. And if Smith does start getting off on strikes, then I think Rakic will drop down, look to tie up with Smith, push him against the cage, potentially take him to the mat. I just think there's more paths to victory for Rakic in this fight, and I think he's better in almost every area of mixed martial arts. I think his striking isn't as technical as Anthony Smith's, but he's definitely more powerful, more explosive. He has more variety in his attacks, especially with the kicks up and down the body, as well as the punches bursting forward. And like I say, I think his wrestling's better. I think his topside grappling's better. I think his defensive wrestling's better. I think his defensive jiu-jitsu is better as well. I think he'll be able to stand back up should Smith take him down. I just think Rakic is the better overall fighter. I think he's the fighter with more paths to victory. I think he's the fighter that is definitely less damaged but more dangerous, which again is a key factor in this fight. So I'm picking Aleksandar Rakic to win this fight. And in the next fight, in the co-main event, we've got Robbie Lawler versus Neil Magny. Neil Magny currently the minus 250 favourite. The comeback on Lawler at plus 210 as the underdog. Now, as for where the value is in this betting line, I absolutely think it sits with the underdog in Robbie Lawler. Now, I do understand to a degree why Neil Magny is a favourite in this fight, but to be a minus 250 favourite and pushing Lawler at plus 210 as the underdog, I think the line's absurd. At that betting line, you've got to be confident that Robbie Lawler is completely washed and completely done, and he doesn't really have a lot left to give. Because if he's not done, and if he's not washed, then I think he is live in this fight. And as for where the betting line moves, I honestly think that we'll see money coming in on Robbie Lawler closer to fight night, through fight week. I think you're a brave man betting Neil Magny at minus 250. You've got to be confident that Lawler's done, and I just don't see any evidence that that is the case at this point. He might be done, he might be washed, but pre-fight, I'm not sure. I'm not seeing it. We'll see how that plays out. But yeah, I think more money will come in on Lawler closer we get to fight night. It'll close up a little bit. As for how this fight plays out, though, as I've already mentioned, I don't think that Lawler is over the hill. He's definitely not the fighter he used to be, 100% agree with that. But I don't think that he's declined enough not to be able to give something at this level in the UFC. I don't think that he can compete in the top 5 that competitively anymore. So I will say that. But outside of the top 5, I absolutely think that Lawler has got the potential to beat most fighters outside of that top 5. You look at his last 3 fights, he is on a 3-fight losing streak. But that's very deceiving when you dig into the fights. So the last fight against Colby Covington, listen, Colby Covington will take down, will do what he did to Lawler against pretty much every fighter in that top 15 outside of Kamaru Usman. You know, he took Lawler down constantly. He tired Lawler out by constantly making him get back up to his feet. And then he just pop-shotting him. Jab, 1-2s, movement, volume, cardio for the rest of that 5-round fight. And it was almost, by the time it hit round 3, it was almost impossible for Lawler to really do anything because Colby still had plenty left in the gas tank. Lawler didn't. He was getting taken down every time he got in close. It was a terrible stylistic matchup for Lawler and a fight where I actually cashed on Colby Covington. The fight before that, Robbie Lawler fought Ben Askren. The fight didn't go on that long. It had a very controversial stoppage with that submission where the referee thought that Lawler was unconscious, but he wasn't. He stood back up straight away. We saw in replays that Lawler actually put his thumb up to the ref to say he was fine. So a bit of confusion there, a bit of controversy. But before that finish, Lawler had Askren in all kinds of trouble. He's still explosive. He's still powerful. He had Askren hurt really badly, messed up his face. And he even picked Askren up and slammed him. And Askren was the wrestler in that fight. After he slammed him, started landing ground and pound, nearly got Askren out of there. To me, that's not a fighter that is declined to a degree where he's got nothing to give in the UFC. Then the fight before that, he fought RDA. I don't think that was a great stylistic matchup for Lawler either. And I actually cashed RDA on that night as well. But Lawler tore his ACL, MCL in the middle of that fight. He could barely stand on it. He couldn't plant his feet. So again, even though it wasn't a great stylistic matchup for Lawler, even though credit to RDA, he caused that damage on Lawler's knee, Lawler was pretty much unable to do anything for the latter half of that fight. So this is what I mean about the 3-fight losing streak. It just doesn't give you the bigger picture when you're looking at the record and seeing that he's lost 3 on the bounce. As for Neil Magny, I'm going to give him props here. He's come back after this Santiago Ponzinibbio fight, a fight where he looked, in my opinion, quite pathetic. Ponzinibbio put a big beating on him, bad beating, pressured him, walked him down, landed some horrific strikes on him. Magny didn't have an answer to anything. Ultimately, he crumbled on the night. But since then, he's come back. He's fought Li Jingliang. He looked great against Jingliang in that fight. Then in his last fight, he fought Anthony Rocco Martin. Again, he looked okay there as well. But there is still some question marks on Magny for me. I honestly thought Lee was a bad stylistic matchup for him because Neil Magny has been notorious in his career for struggling to deal with pressure strikers that can hit hard, which is Santiago Ponzinibbio. That's a good example. Li Jingliang obviously he isn't Santiago Ponzinibbio, but he has that sort of style. Yet Magny dealt with him really well, but Lee did tire in that fight. There's also question marks of Lee outside of China, how he performs. He tends to perform much better in China than he does outside. So, there's some question marks there, but credit to Magny, he did what he needed to do. He won all 3 rounds against Li Jingliang. He looked by far the superior fighter. Then in the Anthony Rocco Martin fight, this is where it's a little bit different. Martin was having a lot of success in that fight. He was doing well. He was clinching up with Neil Magny. He was staying out of the way of the long, sharp, straight strikes that Magny throws. Magny's obviously really tall, long, rangy. So Rocco Martin really did a good job in that fight until he tired, which is a little uncharacteristic of Rocco Martin actually, because he's normally got a good gas tank. In that 3rd round, Magny was able to take over. The first 2 rounds was close, so when it hit the judges' scorecards, Magny had took the 3rd, and because the other 2 rounds were close, he ended up winning the decision. But again, in my opinion, Anthony Rocco Martin and Li Jingliang aren't Robbie Lawler. Robbie Lawler's a veteran, a guy with tons of experience. Sure, he's aging a little bit, sure, he's declined, but Neil Magny isn't in that elite group in the welterweight division, and I think outside of that welterweight group, I think Robbie Lawler is going to have success against pretty much every fighter he fights. I think he is going to be able to walk down Magny. I think he is going to be able to push Magny back. It's a smaller cage as well, which definitely helps Lawler close the distance. If Lawler can't close the distance, Neil Magny is going to win this fight all day long with volume, jabs, straight punches, straight kicks, tying up when he comes in. Because that is the one thing I like about Magny. He's either all the way out or all the way in. He never usually messes about in the boxing range if he can help it. However, he might not have that choice against Robbie Lawler. I think if he does push Lawler against the cage, I think Lawler might be the stronger fighter in the clinch, even though Magny will be the trickier fighter due to the long arms, sneaking the underhooks in and things like that. I'm not sure Magny can get away with taking Lawler down and holding him down. I think Lawler will be able to get back up. So I think the wrestling is a little nullified from Magny's perspective. So then it begs the question, if the wrestling is nullified and if Lawler can do well in the clinch, then is it going to be Magny on the back foot and is it going to be Lawler walking Magny down, landing punches inside the pocket? Magny isn't a power puncher, so I don't think that he will be able to put Lawler out with strikes, so Lawler will probably be able to walk through Magny's punches to land those as well. I just think it's a good stylistic fight for Lawler. I think it's a good fight for him to get back on track. I disagree with the line. I think it's quite absurd, so I'm picking Robbie Lawler to win this fight. And in the next fight in the women's flyweight division, we've got Yeon Kim versus Alexa Grasso. Grasso is currently the minus 320 favourite to come back on Kim at plus 260. As for where the value is in this betting line, I don't think there's any value in this fight at all. I could probably argue it's dog or pass with the plus 260 on Yeon Kim. I think if you're going to be betting anyway in this fight, it's betting that line opposed to the minus 320 on Grasso. I think the line is just very wide, and if last week has taught us anything with Maria Agapova and Shayna Dobson, I know that line is much wider than what this line is, but the point is here, this is the first fight Grasso's had up at flyweight after struggling to make weight at strawweight. I think it's one of those fights that could potentially be quite close, a fight that could go to the scorecards and be very razor close. So for the fact that the line is so wide in a fight that I think could potentially be close, you've got to be really careful. As for where the line moves, it wouldn't shock me to see this close up a little bit come fight night. I don't think that Grasso should be out at minus 350, minus 360, minus 370. I think that would be completely absurd. So if money does come in on this fight, I would expect that sharp money to come back in on Kim opposed to paying the huge chalk on Grasso at minus 320. But as for how this fight plays out, I think it's the type of fight that's going to predominantly play out on the feet. We've got Alexa Grasso, who is definitely more of a striker, really likes to use a boxing. And you've got Yeon Kim, who's actually quite the same. You know, both fighters will mix in kicks, but both fighters are really very boxing heavy, all about the movement and getting into range, landing strikes, getting out, you know, being really technical on the feet. And I think that's why this fight's going to be quite close, because I don't think that either fighter is going to have that one-punch knockout power, and I don't think either fighter is going to be able to accumulate enough volume in combinations to really put their opponents in danger to finish the fight either. And I don't see the fight hitting the mat and there being a submission, so I think it's going to be a very technical boxing fight. We will, of course, see some kicks. Both fighters will mix up low kicks and just mixing kicks every now and again just to complement the combinations. We'll also see some clinch work as well. There'll be some dirty boxing inside there. There'll be battling for positions, battling for the underhooks. It's going to be really interesting to see who wins those clinch battles because, like I say, Alexa Grasso is moving up to flyweight. So it's going to be really interesting to find out how strong she is up in that division. But with that said, I think that Alexa Grasso is going to carry speed up with her, which is going to be important in this fight. And if I'm right in saying that, and she does carry that speed with her, I think a movement in and out of range will be much quicker. I think the combinations will come quicker. I think the jab will come quicker. And I think what that'll allow Grasso to do, and I think this is the reason why the betting line is so wide, is it'll allow Grasso to accumulate that volume over the 15 minutes. So she'll be the fighter that lands more visibly with the optics on Yeon Kim. She'll be the fighter that is moving in and out of range, landing the strikes, and just overall the fighter that looks better on the night. I think if she does start to get away with volume and really starts to pull away from Yeon Kim, we'll see frustration setting in Kim, and I think that frustration will be visible to the judges and us at home. And again, I just think it's another element where Alexa Grasso will look better on the scorecard. So for that reason, I think with volume, with speed, with movement, I'm picking Alexa Grasso to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got a short notice fight for one of the fighters. We should have been having a fun fight between Ricardo Lamas and Ryan Hall. Unfortunately, Ryan Hall pulled out. He's now replaced with Bill Algeo. We've got Ricardo Lamas at minus 260 as the favourite. The comeback on Bill Algeo at plus 220. As for where the value is in this betting line, I do think that the value sits with the favourite very slightly. The line has been moving up and down a little bit. Ricardo Lamas opened a pretty sizable favourite, but then a lot of money came in early on Bill Algeo. It pushed that line back down, and now it's widened again with Lamas, again a clear favourite at minus 260. I think the value is slightly with Lamas, even though there's some question marks about where he's at right now in regards to the decline that he's hit. I still think he's got more than enough to give in this fight. As for where the line moves, I do think that it might close up a little bit. I'm seeing a lot of people take that shot on Bill Algeo, and I actually don't hate it because I don't think that Lamas is the fighter that he used to be, and I think his decline is a real question mark in this fight, but we'll talk about that soon. I think that the line might close up a little bit. I think we might see Lamas close at minus 225, maybe minus 200, but we'll see. As for how this fight plays out, I think Lamas has got every advantage in this fight. He's got an experience advantage. He's got an ability advantage. He's got the striking advantage. I think he's got the wrestling advantage. He's got the jiu-jitsu advantage. He's just the better fighter everywhere. The big question for me is, can Lamas take damage? Can he take a punch? Because he's lost 3 out of his last 4 fights. 2 of those losses were really bad knockouts against Calvin Kattar and Josh Emmett. At 38 years old as a featherweight, he is getting very old for the division. And you just wonder if any of those knockouts have really affected his durability. That being said though, Bill Algeo isn't a huge power puncher. Sure, he's wild, he's explosive, he'll come forward, he'll try and land as much as he can. He looks like he's really excited when he fights, which is a great thing. But if Lamas really is declined, if his durability really is that bad, then sure, Algeo would be able to knock him out. I just personally don't see it happening. I think Algeo defensively has got huge problems, and that's where his biggest holes are. He'll get hit up and down the body. We saw in the Brendan Loughnane fight, Brendan was landing low kicks on him. He was landing straight punches on him. He was able to pressure and be aggressive. Lamas has got a nasty low kick. He always has. It's one of his best weapons and has been for years. And then Lamas can also come forward. He can strike knowing that he can level change as well should he need to. He's got good wrestling, a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, so he's not bothered where this fight goes. Even if Algeo was to take Lamas down, I don't think he can hold him down. I think Lamas would be able to get straight back up or sweep and scramble, get himself in a better position on the mat himself. I'm just having a really hard time imagining Bill Algeo to win this fight. If Algeo does knock Lamas out, I'm not going to be shocked because of where Lamas is at in his career right now. But I think this is a good spot for Lamas to get back in the win column. I think he's got multiple paths to victory. I think he's better in every area in MMA. So I'm picking Ricardo Lamas to win this fight. And in the next fight, I feel like I've broken this fight down 100 times already. We've got the rematch between the very controversial first fight between Ankalaev versus Yeon Cutelaba. Ankalaev currently the minus 330 favourite. The comeback on Cutelaba at plus 270. As for where the value is in this fight, I still think the value is with Ankalaev. I think Ankalaev is the much superior fighter. I think he's the fighter that is technically better everywhere. He doesn't have as much power as Cutelaba. I think that's the one advantage Cutelaba has over him. But aside from that, I think Ankalaev is the rightful favourite in this fight. As for where this line moves, it's a bit crazy because every single time this fight gets re-announced, Ankalaev opens up a bigger favourite each time out and then money comes back in on Cutelaba. So I'm not sure where this line actually closes. It wouldn't shock me for it to close minus 300 on Ankalaev, which will probably put Cutelaba in the region of plus 250. So I think that that's probably where the line's going to close. As for how this fight plays out, I'll break it down once again. You know, we're coming off that first fight that was very controversial. There was animosity leading up into that fight in every area during the interviews, the build-up, the weigh-ins, the stare-downs, and even when they were getting their names read out inside the cage, it all nearly kicked off and erupted. So it's a very, very interesting fight, and I really hope it does actually play out this time. You know, it's been cancelled a few times, the last time being that Yeon Cutelaba tested positive for COVID-19. So hopefully we finally get to see this rematch. The reason it was so controversial in the first fight, if you haven't watched it, Yeon Cutelaba came out at Ankalaev. They started exchanging. Ankalaev kept distance. Ankalaev landed a head kick and a couple of straight punches as well. And Cutelaba started playing possum. So what I mean by that, he was wobbling on his feet. I don't believe he was hurt for a second, but he was wobbling on his feet, hoping that Ankalaev thought that he was time to go in and finish. And as Ankalaev went in to finish, Cutelaba would try and counter with something hard to put him out, to surprise him, knock him out. And actually, credit to Ankalaev, I don't know whether he realised that Cutelaba was playing possum or if he was just being really patient and didn't want to rush it, but he didn't rush in like Cutelaba wanted. He still came in to strike because he saw he was wobbling, but when he came in, Cutelaba started winging big bombs at him. Bombs that Ankalaev saw coming from a mile off, and then Ankalaev touched him up again. Again, he was wobbling, and the referee actually bought into it, stopped the fight, and Cutelaba obviously annoyed, but I don't blame the referee in that position. If the referee thinks that a fighter is hurt and they're not intelligently defending themselves and they're wobbling all over, that referee has every right to stop that fight. I blame Cutelaba for that. You know, you play silly games, you win silly prizes. That's not going to happen again this time. Cutelaba won't make that same mistake, but I still think it's going to be one of those fights where it's going to be explosive, it's going to be aggressive, at least from Cutelaba's side. But again, like I've broken this fight down every single time, I just think Ankalaev is the better fighter. I think potentially, now that Jon Jones is out of the picture in the UFC light heavyweight division, Ankalaev could be the best fighter in that division. We just don't know it yet. We just haven't seen it yet. But I think Ankalaev is a future champion. I think he's going to be dominant in this division. I think he's going to give every single light heavyweight a real problem. Ankalaev is just good everywhere. He's a good striker, good technique. He's got good kicks. He's good with his hands. He's obviously got really good wrestling, a really heavy top game as well, with him being from Dagestan. He's obviously got that great Dagestan wrestling. I think that without looking too far ahead, he's got Yeon Cutelaba in front of him this weekend. As long as he stays out the way of that one bomb from Cutelaba and he doesn't get knocked out, then I think Ankalaev has got a good fight ahead of him here. I think he's the better technical striker. He's the faster striker. He's the fighter with the better cardio as well, which is important. He's the fighter definitely with the better wrestling, the better top game, good ground and pound, hunts for submissions if they're available as well. I think Cutelaba is outmatched in pretty much every area apart from power. So unless Cutelaba lands that one bomb, this is Ankalaev's fight. I'm picking Magomed Ankalaev to avoid that power early on in this fight. Take Cutelaba a little bit deeper and win the fight. I'm picking Magomed Ankalaev to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Maki Pitolo returning, a quick return against Impa Kasanganay, who is also making a quick return after his last Dana White Contender Series fight. We've got Impa Kasanganay, currently the -125 favourite. The comeback on Pitolo at +105 as the underdog. As for where the value is in this fight, I could argue that there is slight value on Kasanganay at -125, but I did anticipate this line to be a bit of a pick-em, if I'm honest. Obviously, we've got the hype on Kasanganay. He's a good fighter. He looks like he's good everywhere. But the veteran experience of Maki Pitolo, the fighter that's been in the UFC a few times now and has had more professional fights in his career, I think that warrants this fight to be closer to a pick'em. But like I say, I do think there's minimal value in Kasanganay at -125. As for where this line moves, it has been moving up and down a little bit, not too much. We've seen Kasanganay up at -140. Now he's down at -125. So there has been money coming in on both sides. I think it'll close roughly where we're at about now. If it did come down to a -110 pick'em, I wouldn't be shocked. And if we saw Kasanganay go back up to -140, again, I wouldn't be shocked either, because he does look like a very promising prospect. As for how this fight plays out, we'll start with Kasanganay. Like I say, he is a promising prospect. He's athletic, he's young, he's 7-0. So what that means, he is going to be developing from fight to fight, which is very exciting, because he already looks like a good fighter. He's definitely UFC ready. He's a good striker. He's powerful. He moves forward. He mixes in punches with kicks. He really does look to land volume, opposed to, that one hard shot that a lot of inexperienced fighters will look for. Even when he goes 3 rounds, he doesn't at any point think, right, okay, now I need to start landing that one shot. He just trusts the process. He knows that he can win rounds and win decisions, so he doesn't need to go all out there, overexert and look for big power shots. He's just really technical on the feet, and it's really good to see. But he's also got a good wrestling game as well. He does shoot takedowns. They're more opportunistic takedowns than actually him putting a game plan together to have a wrestling heavy game plan. So if the takedown's there for him, if the opponent is coming forwards and he sees that opportunity to level change and explode into a takedown, then he'll do it. When he gets his opponents to the mat, he does have a heavy top game as well. It's not the best top game, and his opponents can normally get back up to the feet, but basically he's got a really good all-round game, and this is why there's some hype on him. Let's see how he develops, and he will be developing from fight to fight, being that he's only 7-0 and really young in this game. As for Maki Pitolo, it's not going to be an easy fight for Kasanganay. Pitolo's a good fighter, and again, he's good everywhere. He's got good striking, he's got good wrestling, but more importantly, he's got experience, and he's fought in the UFC a few times already. Obviously, his debut didn't go the way he wanted against Callum Potter. That was a bad loss for him, but that was down at welterweight, where I don't think that he looked that good. I think the weight cut was very harsh as well. But since then, he went back to middleweight, fought Charles Byrd, fought a great fight against Byrd, again mixed it up really well with his strikes, with his wrestling, and he ended up finishing Charles Byrd in the second round. And even in his last fight, I know he lost to Darren Stewart in round 1 with that guillotine choke when he shot in for a takedown, but he wasn't looking too bad against Stewart. He saw an entry and he got caught. This happens in MMA. Stewart's actually a really good fighter and a fighter that I like a lot, so losing to Stewart, just getting caught, I don't put too much stock into that. This is going to be a really good fight between Kasanganay and Pitolo. I just think that although Kasanganay is a little young in this game and he hasn't got that experience that Pitolo's got, I just think that Kasanganay does a really good job of staying out the way of danger, moving in at the right times, and more importantly, winning rounds. This guy knows how to win rounds in the cage. Although I don't think he's going to go out there in 30-27 Pitolo, I just think even in the close rounds, he just does enough, and he's very aware of what he needs to do to close a round off. So if a round is very close, he'll just hit that takedown and look to give that edge to himself when the judges are scoring fights. He seems like a fighter that's got really good fight IQ. And if Pitolo doesn't get Kasanganay out of there, which I don't think he does, I think that'll be a big ask to knock him out or to submit him. I just think Kasanganay, as long as he defends the takedowns coming from Pitolo, because that's where I think Pitolo's biggest path to victory is, I think Kasanganay will do enough to win those rounds. So I'm picking Impa Kasanganay to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Mallory Martin versus Hannah Cifers. Hannah Cifers seemingly fighting once a month at this point, but we've got Mallory Martin at minus 325 as the favourite. The comeback on Cifers at plus 265 as the underdog. As for where the value is, I don't think there's too much value in this fight. I do think Martin's rightfully favoured, but at minus 325, I think that's a little too wide again for this type of fight, similar to what we spoke about with Grasso and Kim earlier on. So it is one of those fights where the favourite's rightfully favoured, but the line is probably a little too wide. As for where the line moves, I'm not sure it moves too much away from where we're at right now. I'd like to say money would come in on Cifers as the underdog to close this fight up, but I don't see many people rush into that betting window to purchase a ticket on Hannah Cifers, even though she is a big underdog. So come fight night on Saturday night, I think we'll be sitting roughly where we're at right about now with this fight. As for how it plays out, Hannah Cifers has got a clear hole in her game. She's a good striker, she'll come forward, she'll look to land in as much volume as possible, even though that volume isn't as high as what I would like to see, but she's a thick girl in regards to her physique. She's strong, she's physical, she will try and bully her opponents where possible, but the big hole in her game is the ground game. If she can get taken down and an opponent can settle on top of her, she then doesn't offer much off her back. She doesn't look for submissions off her back. She doesn't really look to stand up off her back either, and her fight IQ down there isn't great either. Mackenzie Dern struggled to get her down, and if it wasn't for Cifers jumping back into that grappling realm of Dern wouldn't have got the submission, at least not at that point anyway. So you've got to question that IQ when it comes to grappling. I just think that Cifers really needs to develop that ground game, otherwise she is going to come short. And in fights where like this, I think she's going to come short in this fight against Mallory Martin. Mallory Martin, she does look for takedowns. She does look for that top control. Sure, we didn't see it in her last fight, in her debut. She was fighting Viana Jandiroba, who is a phenomenal grappler, and she out-wrestled her and she out-grappled her. It was just a really bad stylistic matchup for Mallory Martin in that fight. But this time, she's got the stylistic advantage because although Cifers is definitely the better striker, Mallory Martin will know that within a couple of minutes of this fight. She'll have this takedown game plan anyway, in my opinion. If she's watched footage on Cifers, or a coach or a team has, then they're going to know where Cifers is deficient. I think Mallory Martin scores takedowns in this fight. I think she has success on top of Cifers, and I think that ultimately will win her the fight, whether she finishes the fight or whether it goes the distance. I don't think Hannah Cifers can stay vertical enough for 15 minutes to be able to win this fight on the feet. So for that reason, I'm picking Mallory Martin to win the fight. And in the next fight, we've got Zach Cummings versus Alessio Di Chirico. We've got Di Chirico currently the minus 115 favourite. The comeback on Cummings at minus 105 as the slight underdog. As for where the value is in this betting line, I do think the value is going to be with the underdog, whichever way that goes actually, because Di Chirico actually opened the underdog in this fight. All the money came back on him. Now there's been a bit of a line flip. Now it looks like it's closing back up again. So the betting line's been a little bit all over the place. I think whoever is the underdog in this fight, whoever is that plus money, the value will be on them. As for where the betting line moves, I think it's going to close at a pick'em if I'm being honest. I think the lines are really close for a reason, and I think it's going to be quite a close fight as well. And this leads us into the breakdown, how this fight plays out. I think we're going to see a little bit of everything in this fight. I think it's going to be a true mixed martial arts fight. I think we're going to see striking. I think we're going to see takedowns. I don't think we're going to see a lot of grappling on the mat because I think both fighters don't settle for being on the back. They can both get back up to the feet. They're both just really similar in both the styles and their abilities and qualities in mixed martial arts as well. They're both quite low volume, so this leads me to believe that the fight will probably be more technical than explosive. I think whoever lands the most volume in this fight has probably got a good chance of winning the fight overall. It's just who's going to take that initiative and move forward and look to land combinations and really mix it all up, because the mixing it all up as well is a really key part. Alessio Chirico's got good takedowns, Cummings got good takedowns, they've both got good takedown defense. It's just going to be a really close fight. I'm actually leaning towards Zach Cummings in this fight. I think Zach Cummings is a little underrated. I think he has been for many years. He's got a lot of experience. Sure, he's had some bad fights. You know, the fight against Trevor Smith was quite bad on many levels, to be honest. But overall, he's just a solid fighter, and he's a fighter that will usually perform for you, never really makes too many mistakes, and he's always got a really consistent game. You know, he never gives you any scares, any shocks, he never gives you any nasty surprises. I think he's just going to do enough to edge this fight against Chirico. I think he could potentially be the stronger fighter in the clinch as well, even though he's the fighter coming up from welterweight, or at least he was a welterweight a couple of fights ago. I think Cummings' game, his experience, and the level of opponent that he's fought over the years is probably coming together now, and he should have a game plan in this fight just to keep it calm, keep it safe, make sure he doesn't do anything daft, and just does enough to win the round. So I think the fight IQ, the veteran experience, will play a factor in this fight. I think that even if the volume does edge over to Chirico slightly, which I think it might do, I think Cummings will do just enough in each of the rounds to at least take 2 out of the 3 rounds should it hit the scorecards. So I'm going to be picking Zach Cummings to win this fight. And in the next fight, another fight that's been put together quite late, we've got Alex Caceres, who should have been fighting Giga Chikadze. Giga Chikadze's pulled out. We've now got the debuting Kevin Croom as Chikadze's replacement. Now, although there's no betting line in the States because this fight was put together not so long ago, we do have a betting line on Parimatch, which I believe is a partner with the UFC. Parimatch have got Alex Caceres at minus 357 as the favourite, with the comeback on Croom at plus 270. Now, based on that betting line, I don't think there's any value in it at all, and I think it could be a dog or pass situation, even though I don't think Croom is going to win the fight, if I'm being honest. But after watching tape, I was expecting to see Alex Caceres at minus 200, maybe minus 225. I do think that he is the rightful favourite in this fight. I just don't think that Alex Caceres should be minus 357 in this spot, and it screams an upset spot at that sort of line, if I'm being honest. I think the betting line is going to come down once it hits the US. I think money would come in on Croom. I think it would push Caceres down to maybe minus 250, minus 225, closer to where I believe that he should be. As for how this fight plays out, it's going to be a really fun fight. I think both fighters are very similar in the styles. They've both got a lot of movement. They've both got a lot of volume. They like to constantly be throwing, constantly be active, bouncing around the cage. They really are just very similar in regards to the styles. It's just, I think, although Croom has had 5 more professional fights than Caceres, the level of opponent Caceres has been fighting for years and years and years inside the UFC, I think that speaks volumes. I think that's going to play a part here. I think that although I like what Croom does earlier in the fight with throwing feints out and staying active, I'm not sure his cardio can sustain that activity early on, whereas Alex Caceres definitely can. His cardio can hold on to that sort of style over 3 rounds. So even if Croom came out and won round 1 against Caceres, I've got a feeling that he'll expend energy winning that first round that he can't afford to expend in that way, and Caceres would probably take over the fight late. I think from a skill perspective, even though they've got a similar style, I think Caceres is probably a little bit better on the feet, although it is very close. But I think when it comes to the wrestling and grappling, I think Caceres is definitely better than Croom, and if he was to try and take Croom down, I think that would be a good path to victory, because the fight could get very close if it stays on the feet, especially if it hits the judges' scorecards, because I think Croom would probably win that first round. The second round would be very close, maybe a coin flip, and then Caceres wins the third round. That's got split decision written all over it. But overall, I think the experience, the level of competition that Caceres has been fighting over the years, and the skills and the qualities that I've seen of both fighters, I think that edges in favour of Alex Caceres. So I'm picking Alex Bruce Leroy Caceres to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Emily Whitmire versus Polyana Viana. We've got Emily Whitmire, the -120 favourite, the comeback on Polyana Viana at +100 as the slight underdog. Now, as for where the value is in this fight, on this betting line, I think that if you've got a good read either side, both sides actually playable. Polyana Viana probably more playable than the -120 of Whitmire, but still at -120, it's only just outside of a pick'em range. So I think there's value on either side should you have that good read. As for where the line moves in this fight, it's a little difficult to tell, to be honest, because Viana opened up the -130 favourite, all the action came in on Whitmire, and now that's pushed Whitmire to the -120 favourite herself. So I do see some fluctuation. I think we will see some bets coming in on Polyana Viana at +100. Obviously, Whitmire has been submitted a couple of times, so with Viana supposedly being a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu world champion, that has questions. Can she submit Whitmire? So at +100, I wouldn't be surprised to see some bets coming in on Polyana Viana. How this fight plays out, it's going to be really interesting because they're quite similar but different in the same respect. And what I mean by that is, when you look at the striking, on the feet, it's not where they're strongest in my opinion, but Polyana Viana's got good kicks, the lead switch kick and the rear kick as well. Emily Whitmire seems to be much better with her hands, good jab, good 1-2, really pops at her opponent and strikes at the right times moving in and out of range. On the mat, I think Whitmire's the better wrestler. I think Polyana Viana is probably the better grappler. Even though Viana got submitted by Macedo in her last fight, which was a bit strange because, like I said, Polyana Viana is supposed to be this Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu world champion and Macedo was a purple belt or a brown belt at the time. So that was a surprise. I think that when it comes to the ground game, we've got a wrestler versus Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu artist. On the feet, we've got a boxer versus a kickboxer. In general terms, that's what we're looking at here. I think it's going to be a really close fight, but I am edging towards Emily Whitmire to win this fight. I think that Viana's been exposed a little bit in a couple of fights. Obviously, the loss to Cifers, nobody expected. The loss to Macedo, I don't think was a total shock, but it was a surprise in the way it happened. You know, I don't think anybody thought Macedo would armbar Polyana Viana and get her out of there. So I think Viana's been exposed a little in a couple of UFC fights. I think Whitmire, obviously the loss to Amanda Ribas at the time, we were a bit like, okay, well, where does that put Whitmire? Now we're seeing what Ribas is about, how far that fighter can go. I don't think that's a bad loss for Whitmire, and Ribas would beat most women in that division as well. She would smoke Polyana Viana also. So I think Emily Whitmire might be the better fighter in this fight overall. She's got to watch the kicks from Viana. She's got to not make a stupid mistake on the mat, but she wasn't too bad against Ribas on the mat. You know, she eventually turned into Ribas, got on top in that first round and finished the round out on top. She didn't look amazing whilst doing so, but the fact that she had some success against a fighter of Ribas's quality tells me that she can have some success against Polyana Viana on the mat as well, which is where I think Viana is most dangerous in this fight. I think that Whitmire slightly edges the striking. I think Whitmire slightly edges the grappling should she be on top. She's got to be on top. So for that reason, with Whitmire being the wrestler and probably going to be the better fighter on top on the mat and should probably edge the striking, I am leaning Whitmire. I'm picking Emily Whitmire to win this fight. And in the final fight of the breakdown, we've got Sean Brady versus Christian Aguilera. Sean Brady currently the -400 favourite. The comeback on Aguilera at +325 as the underdog. As for where the value is in this betting line, I actually think that there still could be some value in Brady as a parlay piece here. Obviously, you wouldn't play a -400 straight. It is minimal value, of course. It's very close to the area where I would just never touch a fighter in MMA, you know, -500, -550, -600 and above. That sort of line, you've really got to be ridiculously confident. As for where the line moves, it could move either way. You know, Christian Aguilera had a good performance in the UFC on his debut against Anthony Ivy. Again, Ivy was a fighter that had a lot of love on the betting line at the betting window. So Aguilera cashes an underdog there. There might be some people that just simply put some trust in the power of Aguilera and the fact that this is MMA and anything can happen. But there's also the other side of that coin where people might just see Brady as potentially easy money and want him in all the parlays, which will make that -400 move to -450, -500, depending on how much money comes in. I personally think it won't be too far off where we're at right about now come fight night, because I can see that fluctuation. Now, as for how this fight plays out, I simply think Sean Brady is better everywhere here, even physically. I think he's the stronger fighter. I think he's the fighter that's going to have better cardio. I think he's the more intelligent fighter. I think he's the better striker. I think he's the better wrestler. I think he's definitely the better grappler. I honestly don't see how Aguilera wins this fight unless he does what he did against Ivy and closes him down and lands a hard shot, hurts him, and then, works for the finish. But I don't think that's going to be easy to do to Brady, because if you put pressure on Brady, Brady will drop down, level change, take you down. And on the mat, we saw against Ismail Nordiev, who I'm actually shocked Nordiev's been cut from the UFC. I think he's a phenomenal fighter with good skills and a fighter that's going to be developing. But against Nordiev, I did cash Brady as an underdog in that spot. I did like him a lot there, and he showed why. He came out in that first round, didn't look too great. He is a little bit of a slow starter, Brady, I will say that, so that's maybe a window for Aguilera to take advantage of. But come the second and third round, Brady knew what he needed to do: tie up with Nordiev, drag him down to the mat, hang on him on top. He never rushed a position on the back of Nordiev. He never allowed himself or put himself in a position to make a mistake. It was all position over submission. That's ultimately what led to him winning the fight relatively comfortably. I think he could do the same against Aguilera. If he does feel Aguilera is a little bit hot coming in with the power, then I think he can just nullify that and slow it down just by using his strength to close that distance, get a hold of Aguilera and just hang on him should he need to. But like I say, I think technically from a striking perspective, Brady's better. I think that he's got good cardio. He's a big guy. He's strong. I think that could play a factor in this fight as well. And ultimately, I think that Brady is the fighter that's more likely to win because he's got more paths to victory. If it stays on the feet and he avoids getting knocked out with a big shot from Aguilera, the longer this fight goes on, the more likely Brady's going to win it. Brady does have to be careful of the takedowns coming in from Aguilera because he does have takedowns himself, but his jiu-jitsu qualities will allow him to stand back up, and that's key here, because if Aguilera can't knock Brady out, then he's going to have to rely on wrestling to try and win rounds, and I don't think that his wrestling can allow him to do that, because Brady should be able to stand back up or sweep and reverse position himself. I think Brady's got pretty much every base covered in this fight. I really like him as a fighter, 12-0, unbeaten. I think he's got a great career in front of him. I think his ceiling's really high. I'm picking Sean Brady to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of On the Moneyline. I hope you all enjoyed it, and once again, guys, I'd appreciate all the likes to the video and subscriptions to our YouTube channel too. Remember, you can get all the betting advice you'll ever need over at MMAPlay365.com. We cater for long-term gamblers that like to build their own bets and strategies, gamblers that just want to follow exactly what I bet on, and we also cater for you fun gamblers that like the fun, long shot parlays, or ACCAs as we call them in the UK. And we also support the DraftKings and FanDuel players with our daily fantasy sports content as well. And that also comes with our very own private chat room, so you can chat to our expert throughout every single fight week. We have plenty of different packages and subscription options for you guys to choose from, and they're all at very affordable prices too. Just hop onto MMAPlay365.com and see what's best for you. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you at the next event.